and welcome to Spiritual Basics Podcast with April and Jen. This is a bi-monthly podcast designed to teach the searchers, seekers, and spiritually curious the basics of metaphysics and New Thought. I am Jen Merkel.
And I'm April Darley, and this is Spiritual Basics Podcast. Basic info, but we're not basic bitches.
No, we are anything but.
No, we aren't.
So, how are you doing, Miss April?
I'm doing really great. Yourself?
I'm doing good. It's so hot here, though. My gosh.
Oh, man.
Hot.
I know. I left Arizona because Texas was supposed to be cooler. And I swear the year I was thinking about moving here, I looked at the temperature, and when it was like 120 in Arizona, it was like 98 here. Mm-hmm. And then the year I moved here, it started to get 108, 110. And they're like, it's the hottest summer ever. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is hot here, but compared to Arizona, I still think it's cooler. It's just,
oh, it is cooler.
It's so much more humid too, though, but
yeah.
It doesn't, that dry heat, it does make a difference. So I was driving in the car the other day and I noticed how hot it was, but I had you on the phone, and it was kind of funny because I was thinking about our conversation later because I was just like, we were trying to talk. So I was just on my way home and from somewhere, and I had like a half an hour. I'm like, oh, I got to get in touch with April because I have to tell her this and I have to tell her this and I have to ask her this. We have to talk about the podcast and I have to do this. And so, and I have to ask her her opinion. Like, should I do this? Should I do that? And I just kept going and going and going. And they're like, hello, can I jump in now? Like, I have an answer for you. I felt bad because it's not that I wanted to cut you off or anything. It's just like all these ideas keep flowing and I want to get them out before like I forget them because, I can forget things pretty easily.
All right, you guys see what she did there? That long stretch of talking with and you're wondering how she breathed. And it's like, but I literally had to break in and go, will you stop talking for just a minute so I can answer your questions and solve this problem?
Kind of like you just did just now.
Yeah.
Not really the kind of person you want to be doing a podcast with, I think.
Well, see, you guys, I'm a professional listener. Like literally that's in my job description. I listen to the troubles of the people and then I provide feedback and response and counseling. So I'm kind of trained not to interrupt. And because I'm a words of affirmation person, that's kind of my pet peeve.
Sorry.
Is to be talked over and interrupted. But
I used to interrupt a lot and I've trained myself not to do that so much. I'll be very conscious about that. I mean, like when I was younger and didn't know any better and then people started hating me. I'm like, why do you hate me? And then anyway. So now I'm going to be really self-conscious about talking. Like,
don't do it. You guys, we have structured this podcast to where we're going to be speaking today in large chunks.
Yeah.
So forgive us ahead of time.
Well, we'll see, we've got our back and forth and everything, but yeah, anyway, I know you said it's because my Aquariusness that I like to talk and long, but I think that it has something to do with it is that, we are the sign of ideas, and when the flow is going, it's the flow, man. I gotta say, I've got Archangel Gabriel has been my buddy lately. I have been banging out blog posts like you would not believe. I think I wrote about 10 blog posts in the span of like 4 days.
Fantastic.
Long ones and like really like good ones, not like, fluff or anything like that. Like it's just been amazing. So thank you, Archangel Gabriel.
Toot.
Yeah, so he is the one who's over the fourth chakra, the fifth chakra, the throat chakra. So if you ever have writer's block, anybody out there, or need help communicating, he's the one. But he has been like sitting there on my shoulder every day. It's been awesome.
That is great. Yay, Team Angel.
Yeah, future show about archangels, definitely.
Yeah, we should definitely do that. I was thinking flower essence too. We were talking about like long stretches of talking. I was like, oh yeah, we need to do a show on flower essences.
What's the connection there?
There's a certain flower essence for people that talk a lot and don't listen to others. It's not that you don't listen. You do listen.
I was gonna say.
But it's like for people that talk more than they listen. Not that that's you, but it just reminded me, it's like, oh, there's a flower essence for that. And we should do a future show on flower essences.
Yeah, you're all into the flower essences, and I really know
it.
very little about it. I think it'd be really cool to learn.
I do it as part of my daily jam. And if you're an empath, that is super gentle, but yet very potent, and it works a lot better.
You know, I was also thinking earlier today about some future shows because something came to me. I'd love to do a future episode on the differences between things like empaths versus intuitive versus witches versus pagans, because a lot of people, especially when you're starting out, you might be like, well, you know, I like to do this and I'm a little interested in that, but I don't know. And it's just kind of interesting to see what's out there. Like myself, I don't think of myself as a witch, but sometimes when I learn more about witches, I'm like, well, I kind of do some of those things. Like I don't do spells per se, but I do work with crystals. And when you work with crystals, that's kind of like spells. And, you know, so, you know, I don't do curses or anything, but some witches don't do curses.
Exactly.
So, I don't know. Anyway, I feel like we're doing a little mini show right now, but
I call that witchish.
Witchish.
I'm witchish.
Yeah.
I will say I'm witchish.
I'm a basic witchish.
Witchish. I'm witchish. You know, a smidge of witchish.
Yeah. All right. Well,
speaking of witchish,
witchery,
we got some things that would fall right into that otherworldly realm stuff today. Yes. We got a great show.
Absolutely. We're talking about elementals today. And before I get into too much of what an elemental is, I do want to mention that when we have an idea for a show, sometimes we just know some things about it. It's just stuff we picked up along the way. But rather than just kind of give you like, hey, yeah, I learned about this 5 years ago and this happened, you know, we like to be a little more structured and give you as much information as we can that makes sense. So we do plenty of research and we have certain sources. I want to make sure that you guys know that a lot of the information from today's show, at least from my end, came from Wikipedia, and only because there is such a limited amount of information on elementals out there. There are some like websites that are just dedicated to fairies and stuff like that, but all the stuff that I found like that, it was the same as what I saw on Wikipedia. So I don't know if those same people are doing Wikipedia entries or if somebody else is. But anyway, there's a lot of information about elementals on Wikipedia. So if there's something specifically that you want to learn more about, head over to Wikipedia and do a little search and you can probably find out. Because we're just, you know, going over, I mean, this is basics. We don't get too detailed, but there's some pretty good information here.
And on my end, some of the resources that I used is Doreen Virtue's Realms of the Earth Angels, where she kind of breaks down the difference between some of the elemental type classes, what element they're from, what are their personality traits, and folklore. So some of the folklore stuff I'll talk about is from W.B. Yeats. And I have spent a lot of time in Ireland, and I stayed at some of the same places that Yeats did when he was writing and studying and seeing fairies and having his fairy experiences.
That's super cool. Now, the Doreen Virtue item you're talking about is a book, actually, right? Because you didn't specifically mention that, I want to make sure if anybody who's looking, you know, knows that it is. And what was it called again?
Realms of the Earth Angels. Once upon a time, she had a video course, but it's no longer available. But I think you can still get the book, Realms of the Earth Angels. And there are 2 editions. And if you want the most information, it would be the 2nd edition.
Yeah, a quick Google search will give you all that information. And I don't know if they have it on Amazon or anything anymore, but definitely you could probably get it at least as a secondhand copy somewhere.
Absolutely.
All right, so now let's get into it. So an elemental is a mythic being described in occult and alchemic works from around the time of the European Renaissance. And most notably, Paracelsus was a Swiss alchemist and philosopher during the German Renaissance period. He was the one who really brought in a lot of information about elementals, wrote about them, and he was talking about how they represent all the elements. So we have 4 different elements and we have 4 different classifications of elementals. The ones that represent the earth are called gnomes. And the ones that represent water are called undines. Sylphs represent air, and salamanders represent fire. And these are just more of a general term. So even though, like, for example, we'll talk about fairies in a minute, fairies are considered elves, or sorry, gnomes, because they represent the earth, even though they're fairies. And I know that, just like I said, gnomes is a general term in this sense. Well, some of the common qualities that all elementals have is that they protect the earth and the environment. So they protect the four elements that they're assigned to. They're human-like beings that are between the human world and the spirit world. And, they wear clothes, they eat, sleep, everything like humans, but they do have magical powers. And they've received some modern popularity from things like J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and also gaming like Worlds of Warcraft and Dungeons and Dragons. So historically, elementals tend to sometimes get a bad rap. They've got both good and bad, but in the more modern sense, they're thought of to be more good beings just because of a lot of the literature that's been out there.
Right. So I think as folklore has developed, it really started out maybe them being tricksters, not so good, something you need to be wary of. And it really has morphed into kind of modern day pop culture where fairies are now good and trustworthy and something that you want to work with. And the same with a lot of the elementals in that way. When I first started doing my Ireland journeys, I've been to Ireland 9 times, you guys, because I freaking love it.
You got to round it out and make it 10 one of these days, girl.
I know. I got to get back over to the land of my people. But the fairies are very entwined with Irish culture. And in fact, in Ireland, they often call them the wee folk or the gentry. But another word for them is fae. And it's so ingrained in their culture that it's a slang term. If somebody's not paying attention or seems to be a bit of an airhead, they have a saying, well, that person's away with the fairies. So what are the differences between fairies and angels? And it is actually kind of a pretty big one. So angels are at this high celestial level of vibration, really high frequency. But fairies, because they are earth angels, if you will, or nature angels, they need to be closer to the earth to do their actual work and to help plants and flowers grow, help the animals. So that means their vibration is a bit lower. It's still higher than a human being, but it's lower than an angel. So angels are ready, willing, and able to work with absolutely everyone, but fairies are very selective. And fairies will also have you do something for them before they do something for you. It's almost like that, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, little tit for tat there. And one way, fairies have this ability to scan your aura, and they can tell if you're a good person. Do you recycle? Are you kind to animals? And if they deem you worthy, then you can request help with the fairies. But they may want you to do a task first. So when I first started working with fairies in Arizona, I got the nudge to pick up trash. So I picked up trash for like weeks and weeks. And once I proved my worth, actually, I would find money in the street, or I would get help with some other task. And if you want to work with abundance or prosperity, then fairies are excellent helpers to call in.
Yeah, fairies are known to be really good at manifesting. So if you want to manifest, especially in material wealth or money, fairies are excellent for that.
And our pets, fairies almost act like a little guardian angel to our pets. So if our pets are injured, you can call on Archangel Ariel or Raphael, of course, but also fairies to help with your pet.
Yes, and actually, I can't believe we didn't write this down in the notes, but I posted a link to an article I found a little while ago about corgis specifically. So I have a Pembroke Welsh Corgi puppy. Well, she's 10 months now, so she's almost doesn't qualify as a puppy anymore. But on one of my corgi groups on Facebook, they shared this post that fairies are very connected to corgis specifically because they like to ride on a corgi's back. And it's funny, too, because it never really occurred to me. I mean, fairies are really, I mean, they love animals anyway, but specifically corgis in this case. And it's funny because my little corgi Karma, she has a fairy spirit. She has a fairy energy, definitely. So,
and the fairies not only would ride them, but they ride them into battle, right? Can you imagine Fairies riding corgis into battle. I think it's the best thing ever.
All I
I
can think
loved it.
about is like their belly is getting muddy because that's exactly what happens to Karma when she's walking outside. If it's even a little bit wet or dirty, not only are her feet dirty, but her entire stomach. Just because
Karma,
she's, a low rider.
she's a battle steed. That's all I can think about Karma now. She's a battle steed. I love it. But so fairies in old folklore had a reputation of being tricksters, and you did not want to get on the bad side of a fairy. And one of the things that the old legends would say is that fairies would switch out their own sickly children for a healthy human child, and those were called changelings. And the fairies might try to lure you to their realm by playing this enchanting music. And if you went to the fairy realm, you had to be very careful not to eat or drink anything while you were there, or you would be trapped in the fairy realm forever. And time does not pass in the fairy realm like it does here on Earth. So an hour listening to the fairy music might be 50 years here on Earth. And fairies love to party and dance and play. So they work hard and they play hard. And if you've ever met someone with that fairy energy about them, that's exactly what they're like. They're just full of life. And after a fairy's hard day's work, they like to party at night. And there's a legend that says these mushroom rings that you see are from the fairies dancing. And it's the heat of their dancing causes the mushroom ring to spring up overnight. In Ireland, they have fairy mounds, and the legend is you should not walk through a fairy mound, or that's a portal to the fairy realm, and you could be lost forever. And when I was in Ireland, the poet W.B. Yeats spent a lot of time in Ireland, and there is this particular mountain called Ben Bulben. And in his legends, there would be a fairy door that would open in Ben Bulben every night, and the fairies would stream out. And I stayed at a bed and breakfast that was at the base of Ben Bulben. And I had a lot of really interesting experiences in Ireland. So it's a very magical place. I highly recommend that you go. In Ireland, they most likely refer to the fairy, as I said before, the wee ones or the gentry are the polite terms because you don't want to insult a fairy, or that could be very bad for you. But they're also known as the Sidhe. It's Sidhe is the Sidhe. So the Sidhe, the fae, the wee folk, the gentry, if you're being polite, is all fantastic. I mean, I could talk about fairies forever.
It's cool too, because I had talked about, if you want to manifest things, it's good to be working with fairies, but how do you find fairies, right? So fairies do want you to do something for them. Leaving them an offering of some kind is really great. You're going to find fairies in wooded areas or something that's very natural. So for example, in my last apartment, I lived near a nature trail. And when I would go walking on that nature trail, usually at like dusk, I would see fairies. I knew I was with the fairies. And that's a really good time because fairies are known to be most prevalent during the in-between times. So that's like dusk, right between daytime and nighttime, or dawn between nighttime and daytime, midnight between one day and another, or even during the equinox between seasons, or midsummer. And as far as leaving an offering for them, what I would like to do is I would take like blueberries. They love blueberries, or fresh berries of any kind. They love anything shiny.
And chocolate.
Yes. So if I had like a shiny button that I had left over from sewing, or something that fell off one of my clothes, or maybe it's just like those little buttons you get in little mini tiny Ziploc bags in your jacket. Oh, also, if you have broken crystals, like if some of your crystals broke or a piece of it broke off, save that for the fairies. Go stick it when you're walking. I would stick it in like a little area where it was not where people usually walk, because they're not going to be out. It's kind of like if you think like if they're like when you're walking in nature, there's birds all around you. There's all different kinds of animals. They're there, but you don't see them. Fairies are the same way. They're not going to be right in the path of everybody. You kind of want to stay off to the side. So if there's a little area where there's some rocks behind a tree, or inside the bushes, things like that, I would stick something shiny in there and leave that for the fairies. And then what's really cool is a couple days later, a day later, a couple days later, sometimes even a week later, go back to the same spot and see if they've left you something. Because there have been times that I've seen, like I've gotten feathers, I've gotten little flower petals, things like that. It's really cool. So it's kind of like, hey, we love you too. And they give back. So it's kind of fun.
Definitely. So the traditional fairy offering is milk and honey or cake. But fairies love chocolate, fruit, any kind of fruit, so something natural. And some people assume that your treat may disappear, but it won't necessarily disappear. During Virtue, she talked about the fairies kind of sip the life force from it. Mm-hmm. So your piece of chocolate might still be there, but the fairies have eaten it, like energetically taken in that life force. And I also have had fairy gifts left for me. I've left them chips of crystal, like crystal chips, but I have had them leave me a rosemary sprig before and a quartz crystal at my front door. That was just random. But I've also had them take crystals too. So
yes,
like, we've also lost things.
Yes. Fairies are very mischievous, and actually most elementals really are mischievous in different ways, but fairies especially. And I find that for me, when I'm in that state, like for example, tonight I'm going to be packing and I know I'm going to be frantic because I have a certain amount of time. I don't want to be up till midnight or 1 a.m. packing to go on a road trip tomorrow. So I need to get certain things done. I'm on a mission. I've got my blinders on. I'm doing this and that. I'm likely to bump into things for one. That's why I would be bruised on my arm right now, actually. But I am like, oh my gosh, I can't find my comb. Where is my comb? Like, I don't know. I only have 2 places in the entire house I ever put it, and it's not in either of those places. And I'll look and look, and I'm so upset. And then I realize, you know what? The fairies took it. The fairies did something, and that's their way. They're being mischievous, but also they're probably kind of saying, hey, Jen, you need to kind of chill out and just remember yourself and stop getting, get over yourself, girl. And then I'll be like, okay, I've had enough. I get it. I understand. I got it. So can I please have my comb back? And usually I'll get it back within like 20 minutes, half an hour, sometimes a little bit longer, but I always do seem to get those things back. So
yeah, mine, they tend to take my stuff when I'm sleeping or napping. I used to be a big napper, and I have this table right beside my couch. And one day I sat my remote control on the table, took a nap. When I woke up, it's gone, and I never found that thing. And then a few months later, I had this beautiful honey calcite crystal. Oh, it was gorgeous. Same thing, right next to the table, gone. And I did not find that thing for 6 months.
Wow.
I did eventually get it back, but it took a while. The remote control is in fairyland because that never came back to me. That was terrible.
I don't know. I'm telling you, I think it's inside your couch. It's my own intuition. I think it's, is it the same couch you have now?
Nope.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's like the last couch, but I searched that couch.
I think it's inside the part that you can't get to. Like somehow it got in that, like below the cushion area or something. I don't know. But anyway,
it's a fairy
it's gone.
Pocket dimension.
It's gone. Yeah, that's where the fairies were hanging out.
It's a fairy pocket dimension. Now, similar to fairies are pixies. So you might be going, what's the difference? Well, pixies are smaller, and pixies are a little bit more gardeners. And there's just not a lot of difference between fairies and pixies, but pixies tend to be a little bit more reclusive, and they are extremely loyal to certain people, but they're not as outgoing, if you will, as a fairy. And they just stick more to their garden. And then we have elves. It's so interesting with elves because and Doreen Virtue's reference literature, she really does talk about elves being the taller of the elementals. So very tall, very thin, large eyes. And they tended to keep to the forest rather than gardens and plants and flowers and populated areas. They really were protectors of the forest rather than populated areas.
Interesting. A lot of my knowledge about elementals and I guess a lot of mystical things in general come from the Nordic area, Scandinavia. But back then in medieval times, they're mostly known as beautiful females that live with an elf king. And they like to dance in circles, and which caused rings like the fairy rings that April was talking about. Also, in Germanic cultures, they've been known to be living among humans and sometimes referred to as a fairy, even though technically we're talking about elves. They are considered neutral, so they're not considered good or bad necessarily, but ambivalent about people. So they might help you, they might hinder you. It just depends. Now, one thing I found also in my elf research that I wasn't aware of was that elves are sometimes like jerks. Like if they don't, they can be real jerks according to some folklore where it included things like causing diseases, illnesses in people and livestock, like sharp abdominal pains and even mental illness. And then sometimes threatening, like sexually threatening people and abductions. The elves been accused of abductions and sometimes even considered demonic.
You can find some of those same stories with the fairies in Ireland and the European folklore as well. Another thing with the fairies and elves, whatnot, is that you should never tell them your real name because it gives them power over you. And if a fairy does a service for you, you should never thank it, or it would have power over you. You'd be indebted to it. Now, that is old folklore. I certainly thank my fairies now because they're doing me a good turn. I'm doing them a good turn. And so I think that's just folklore superstition.
Yeah, and there's this entire episode is about folklore, and most of what we do can qualify under superstition as well, I suppose. But yeah, it's true. And I'll be talking about some other things in a minute, but like with anything, just take it with a grain of salt, and whatever you believe is what's true. So just work with whatever you feel you're guided to and what your beliefs are. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about gnomes. And again, getting back to my Scandinavian roots, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about gnomes specifically, is because I do feel a connection to them. Well, the first recorded things about gnomes were in about the 16th century. The Swiss and German people called them people of small stature who guarded treasures, mines, and gemstones. They're friendly, curious. They love being given commands and never ask for anything in return. As a matter of fact, the best way to keep a gnome happy is to give him work to do. Say, go clean up my table. And don't even say, go clean up my table, please. They don't want you to be polite. They want you to tell them what to do. They want to have work. So kind of think about, like in Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, these little dwarves, which are like gnomes, they are going off to the mines. They whistle while they work. They live to help people. Their love language is acts of service.
Nice one. Nice.
That right in there. Anyway, so they do live in underground cities, and sometimes it's synonymous, like I said, with dwarf or fairy. They also, gnomes in Scandinavia, are helpers of what they call Father Christmas, so Santa Claus, in fighting wicked goblins. You can find gnomes in things like the Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter, in more modern times.
In your garden, hello.
Yeah,
that's where we need to, in your garden.
Because that's kind of like the same as if you would have a gargoyle. It protects your property. They're protecting your treasures. Great. So in Sweden, if you've ever seen like the little Christmas gnome, the little guy, he's like stout and round. He's got a beard and a nose and then a hat. Like you don't even see his eyes or anything, right? That's a Swedish gnome. And those guys, you put them by your Christmas tree because they protect the presents and the ornaments in the tree. They protect the stuff that's in your house. So that's their job. So that's called tomta, actually. That's the name for this Swedish gnome. Now, like I said, dwarves are also similar. That's more rooted in German, but you also do find those with English history and Norse. They're human-like, and they're found in the mountains and inside the earth. They're more about wisdom, mining, crafting, smithing. They're short and ugly. They have like a stature that's smaller, and that's tends to be actually more of a depiction from recent storytelling, like in J.R.R. Tolkien's works. And again, they are so similar to gnomes that we don't want to spend too much time talking about them. But there are so many, like, so we've got gnomes, dwarves, brownies, and trolls, goblins, leprechauns. These are all so very similar. Some of it just depends on what part of the world you're talking about. For example, the brownies. So brownies are like an elf, or like a gnome, but they love to work around the house specifically. So they'll do chores for you, or will do chores for the household's owners while they're sleeping. And these guys are easily offended. They wear rags or they're naked. So if the owner of the house offers them clothing, they'll be offended and they'll leave and never come back. So if you want a brownie to clean up your, like to vacuum for you while you're sleeping, clean up all the stuff off your floor, just tell the brownie, go ahead and do that. And they'll do that while you're sleeping. They, in older times where there were more house helpers around, they were champions for the good helpers, but the lazy ones, they would torment. They would taunt them. Similar, like we were just talking about what the fairies would do.
Right.
The brownies would do the same thing. And the brownies, actually, the Girl Scouts are named, the brownies Girl Scouts, they're named after these brownies. But there's a brownie that I'm thinking a lot of you probably know who that is. That's Dobby.
Dobby.
Right? Dobby. He's so sweet. Dobby,
right,
from the Harry Potter series, is a perfect example of a brownie because he would do anything for Harry Potter. But if you crossed him, you were in trouble.
When we were structuring this show, we thought about doing this by the elements: earth, air, water, fire. But the earth category is so large that we could have done 2 or 3 shows just on the earth category.
Yeah.
And so we just decided to give you the highlights of the elemental world just as an appetizer so that you can do a lot of research on your own, because there's so many in the earth. Air and fire don't tend to have quite as much, and the water category is quite a few as well.
All right. So speaking of water elements, we have mermaids and mermen. Those are probably the best known water elementals. And I think a part of that is because of Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid, but also the origin of mermaids. Some people think that somehow they derived from the sirens as depicted in the Odyssey and in Greek mythology. Actually, though, sirens originally are depicted as being half human and half bird.
Sirens lure men to their death, but mermaids don't, right?
Well, actually, that's true. I mean, that's how I believe it. But in my research, it looks like some people do believe that mermaids have been known to do that, especially in the British times during the time of Blackbeard, where sailors would avoid what they called enchanted waters because mermaids and mermen were thought to be there. And if you encounter them, you're likely to be charmed. And these creatures, the mermaids and mermen, are going to take all your gold, meanwhile drag you to the bottom of the sea.
No pirate is going to stand for that.
Well, that's why actually Blackbeard literally would avoid those waters. He would tell his navigators, we're not going through there. Something else that's interesting too is there's a little story about Christopher Columbus. When he was on his journey in 1493, he reportedly saw 3 mermaids. And he did mention that they were quite ugly in the face. So he was a little surprised about that. So some people have a conjecture. They think that maybe it was manatees that he saw. Mm-hmm. But I tend to think that maybe they were just ugly mermaids. I don't know.
Maybe. Who knows?
One thing that's really cool about my research, too, that I didn't necessarily know beforehand, and I know a lot about mermaids, but a couple of different sources noted that mermaids typically have red in their hair and green in their eyes. And it's interesting because I have those things, and I definitely have a mermaid spirit. So it was kind of like a little boost for me, like, oh yeah, just like a little validation. Like, I always knew I had a mermaid spirit. Now,
yeah, Doreen Virtue also spoke about that, and she said the figures for the mermaids are often hourglass, very curvaceous.
Yeah, I'm definitely got the curviness going on.
About chicka row row.
A little too much, I think. Yeah. So, and just to kind of say, I don't have green eyes and red hair, but I definitely have strawberry blonde hair by my natural color, which my hair color can change probably 6 times throughout the year, as April knows. But yeah, and then also my eyes are hazel green, so they're not completely green, but they are brownish green. And anyway,
and your voice is enchanting.
Yes, and I'm a singer.
And you're a singer, right?
I was going to say that's one of the reasons why I can talk so much without getting a breath. I'm trained to do that.
Right.
So anyway, like we said, if you want to learn more about elementals, Wikipedia is a great place to start. There is so much information about it, or the book that April mentioned by Doreen Virtue also is really good.
So that's Realms of the Earth Angels.
Yes. So thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. We would love, we were going to have a mailbag section tonight, but we didn't get any questions. So we need your questions.
What?
I know. Nobody wrote anything in. Wah, wah.
All right. We're going to have to put the fairies on it. Mail.
Please send us your questions. Or even if you just want to chat or tell us how fabulous we are, if you don't mind. I mean, that'd be awesome.
Take it. Oh, yeah.
Just go ahead and email us at spiritualbasicspodcast@gmail.com. You could also visit our website, which is spiritualbasicspodcast.com. There's a contact form you can fill out as well. And we would love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
So thanks, everybody, so much for joining us. We really appreciate you. We love you. We want to hear from you. And we look forward to next time. Till then.
Yes. Bye-bye.